Good morning. Today we look at Matthew chapter 27, verses 27 through 66. That combines tomorrow's reading with today. Tomorrow, of course, Sunday, we'll have worship as normal at Mabel at 9 o'clock and McHenry at Our Savior's at 10:30. Yeah, it's a communion Sunday tomorrow, third Sunday of the month already. I was reminded last night of why we didn't have Ash Wednesday service last year, because Ash Wednesday was on Valentine's Day last year, and I had my right knee scoped, and so I did the morning devotion, and then for the evening devotion, I could see the crutches in the corner of the, and I thought, whoa, that's already been a year ago, or just only a year ago, whichever way you look at it. But regardless, that's the way it is. In these verses we look at today, it's the crucifixion of Jesus. And, Pilate yesterday had handed Jesus over. He had released Barabbas and handed Jesus over to be crucified. And the soldiers take Jesus to the governor's headquarters. They gather the whole cohort around him. That's like 500 men gathered around Jesus, and they're mocking him, spitting on him, beating him, putting a scarlet robe on him, and "Hail, King of the Jews," and all of this horrible stuff that we just hate to hear and see. And they put a reed in his right hand and knelt before him and mocked him. And so the reed in his right hand, is one of those things we just kind of gloss over. But they took that reed then, out of his hand and used that as one of the things that they hit him with. They hit him on the head with it and put this crown of thorns on his head. And it's just, the more you read, the more it just hurts. And you try to separate yourself a little bit from this, but it's just really hard to separate yourself from the suffering that Jesus did on the cross. And not only on the cross, but before he got to the cross, with all of the mocking, with the, being spit on, being beat with a reed, having this crown of thorns, and just, the mockery of the Roman soldiers, put this crown on him, "Hail, King of the Jews," and to be made fun of that way is, we don't like being made fun of either, and especially, in a way like Jesus was. And verse 32, then they go out, and they came upon a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they made him carry Jesus' cross, Matthew's gospel tells us. And history will tell us that Simon of Cyrene was a believer in Jesus, one who followed him, trusted in him, but also that Simon of Cyrene was a free man, and that for these soldiers then to have compelled him to carry Jesus' cross was, against what the law would have him do, So these Roman soldiers, kind of broke the law that way, and put Simon of Cyrene out. And whether he complained about it or not, we don't hear. But they went to this place of Golgotha, which we know is offered the place of the skull, offered him the wine, and put him on a cross, and continued to mock him. Put the sign over his head, "The King of the Jews." And Matthew's gospel, again, they all have the two bandits, rebels crucified with him. I think the new version of the New Revised Standard calls these people, I think it was rebels instead of bandits. And whatever, they were deserving of their death, as the other gospels tell us. But in Matthew's gospel, neither of these two bandits recognized Jesus either. And so Jesus is alone on the cross with passers-by mocking him, passers-by, spitting out the words, "Oh, if he's the King of the Jews, let him save himself. If he's the Messiah," and just, the agony that caused Jesus as well, to have all of that. And, he's the King of Israel. Let him come down, and then we will believe in him. That was, from the scribes and the Pharisees, the religious leaders, and if he can do this, we'll believe, how could they not believe all of the miracles that he did? How would they? One more thing, they needed one more thing, but you know, even after the resurrection, which is the big thing, you know, they didn't believe in Jesus either, the majority of them. He says he trusts in God. Let God deliver him if he wants to, you know, because he said, I am God's son, you know, and it's just, you know, a horrible, horrible thing that way. And then in verse 45 it says, from noon on, darkness came over the whole land. And how fitting is that the sin, the death, the evil of the world, you know, just, you know, is completely embodied in this dark. You know, we look at darkness, we look at, you know, as being, you know, a time of more evil things happening, in a time of night that, you know, more crimes happen, you know, in the nighttime when you're not so visible. But the darkness comes over the land, and it's for 3 hours, you know, in the middle of the day, you know, when the sun should be the brightest. And it wasn't just, you know, like clouds covered the sun and it was a cloudy day, but, you know, it was dark. And Jesus, you know, cries out to God, you know, why have you forsaken me? But even though he uses that, in those words of Psalm 22, you know, if you read them all, you know, that starts out, that feeling of being forsaken, and yet further on in the Psalm, it is a statement of trust in God as well. And, you know, King David felt that way, and we feel that way too. We feel lost, we feel forgotten, and sometimes it's just, you know, where are you, God? And I think at times like that, you know, it's good to remember that Jesus felt that way too, but yet through it all, you know, it's into your hands I commend my spirit. You know, your will, not my will, and all of those things that Jesus went through. And as Jesus died, it says at that moment the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And, you know, that's again taken as a sign that, you know, the heavens were rent open, you know, that with the temple torn, this temple curtain was there to separate the Holy of Holies, where God lived in the temple. So this temple torn in two just made God open, you know, opened the doors for everybody to God that way. He was no longer hidden or separated. And when it was torn from top to bottom, you know, it was torn from heaven. It wasn't torn from the bottom up. You know, it was the God coming down in all of those different ways. And it says that, you know, the tombs were opened, the bodies of saints had fallen asleep were raised, and after his resurrection, they came out of the tombs and entered the holy city and appeared to many. You know, so there was, think of the mass chaos that would have, you know, and everything going on. And yet, when this happens, the centurions in verse 54, who were keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake, saw what happened. They were terrified and said, truly, this man was God's son. So here these Roman soldiers recognize in Jesus that, you know, he is truly God's son because of the powers of heaven and earth that were reckoned with that day. And then verse 55 is one, many women were there also looking on from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee and had provided for him. Among them Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, the mother of the sons of Zebedee. So these faithful women who had been following Jesus, following his disciples, providing for them, were there. So, you know, so often, you know, and Jesus, I'm sure, felt totally alone on the cross. But yet these women were there. And in another gospel, we have Jesus speaking to his mother and to his disciple John. So, you know, Jesus wasn't totally alone. There were some there that believed, some that trusted, some that were pained to no end, just like we are. You know, so they felt that sadness and sorrow as well. So these women, you know, were faithful. And after Jesus died, Joseph of Arimathea came, and another gospel will tell us that Nicodemus was with him. And they take Jesus and they lay him in the tomb. And verse 61, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there, sitting opposite the tomb. So we had these faithful witnesses that were there, that were mourning. You know, so Jesus wasn't totally abandoned by all. this reading for today ends with the chief priest, the Pharisees, going to Pilate and saying, he said he's going to rise again. So we need to have a guard there to make sure his disciples don't steal his body. And so Pilate does. He says, you have the soldiers place the guard. And this is where we end for today. And Monday morning, a new day will dawn and the resurrection will happen.